I was halfway through mowing my backyard in Phoenix, Arizona, when I noticed the gate swinging open. And before I could process what was happening, Dennis Whitmore, HOA board member and professional pain in everyone's rear, was walking straight across my lawn toward my brand new Toro Time Master mower like he owned the thing. "Hey," I shouted, pulling off my work gloves and jogging toward him. "Dennis, what are you doing?" He didn't even look at me, just kept marching toward where I'd left the mower running near the back fence while I'd gone to move a sprinkler. The audacity of this guy never ceased to amaze me, but this was crossing a line even for him. "Dennis," I called again, louder this time. He reached the mower, turned it off, and started pushing it toward my gate. That's when I broke into a full run. "What the hell do you think you're doing with my mower?" I demanded, catching up to him and stepping in front of the gate to block his path. Dennis finally looked at me, his face already twisted into that self-righteous expression he always wore during HOA meetings. He was 50-something, with thinning gray hair slicked back with too much gel, and he wore polo shirts tucked into khaki shorts like it was his uniform. "Your lawn is 2.5 inches over regulation height, Connor," he said, using my full name like we were in court. Section 4, subsection B of the HOA covenant states that grass cannot exceed 3 inches in height. Yours is clearly 5.5 inches. Are you insane? I'm literally mowing it right now. That's why the mower is running in my backyard. The violation has already been noted. I'm confiscating this mower until you pay the fine and demonstrate compliance with community standards. I stared at him, genuinely wondering if he'd lost his mind. "You can't just steal my property, Dennis. That's called theft. It's illegal." "It's not theft. It's enforcement of HOA regulations." Section 12 gives the board authority to take necessary measures to ensure compliance. Section 12 says nothing about stealing people's lawn equipment. I read the entire covenant when I bought this house. Dennis's face reddened. "I'm a board member, Connor Lawson. I know what the covenants say better than you do. Now step aside, or I'll add obstruction to your violation report." This was absolutely insane. I'd lived in Sunshine Vista Estates for 2 years, and while Dennis had always been overzealous about HOA rules, he'd never done anything like this before. He'd issued fines for trash cans being visible from the street, for garden gnomes exceeding approved decoration sizes, and once for my house number being 1/2 inch too tall. But stealing someone's mower in broad daylight was a whole new level of crazy. "I'm not moving," I said firmly. "Put the mower back, finish whatever power trip you're on, and get off my property." "Fine." Dennis pulled out his phone. "I'll call our HOA attorney and have you cited for violation of multiple covenants plus obstruction. The fines will be substantial. Call whoever you want." "You're not taking my mower." We stood there in a standoff, him gripping the mower handle, me blocking the gate. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, was watching from her kitchen window with obvious concern. Great. This would be all over the neighborhood Facebook group within the hour. Dennis's phone rang before he could make his threatened call. He answered it with an irritated, "What?" I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but Dennis's expression shifted from annoyed to alarmed. "What do you mean the sprinklers are flooding the common area?" "I just adjusted those timers yesterday." He glanced at me, then at the mower, clearly torn between his current mission and whatever crisis was unfolding. "Fine, I'll be there in 5 minutes." He ended the call and pointed a finger at me. "This isn't over. You'll receive formal violation notices by end of business today, and the fines will start accumulating daily until you comply. My grass will be 3 inches tall in about 20 minutes when I finish mowing it, you maniac." Dennis stormed off through the gate, leaving my mower behind. I watched him go, shaking my head in disbelief. This HOA had been a thorn in my side since day one, but Dennis Whitmore was the absolute worst part of it. He seemed to genuinely enjoy making people's lives difficult. I finished mowing my lawn, making sure to get it down to exactly 3 inches just to eliminate any possible excuse for Dennis to come back. The whole time I worked, I kept replaying the confrontation in my head, getting angrier with each pass of the mower. Who did this guy think he was? The HOA board had some authority, sure, but they weren't above the law. They couldn't just confiscate personal property. After I finished, I took photos of my freshly mowed lawn from multiple angles, documenting the height with a ruler in several spots. If Dennis wanted to play the documentation game, I could play it too. Every blade of grass measured between 2 3/4 and 3 inches exactly. I was uploading the photos to my computer when my doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see Sharon Mitchell, the HOA president, standing on my porch. She was a stern-looking woman in her late 50s who always wore business-casual clothes even though she'd been retired for years. Unlike Dennis, Sharon was usually reasonable, if a bit rigid about the rules. "Connor, do you have a minute?" she asked when I opened the door. "If this is about my lawn, I just finished mowing it. It's well within regulations." "Actually, it's about your altercation with Dennis this afternoon. He filed a formal complaint claiming you threatened him and refused to allow a routine inspection." I felt my jaw clench. "That's not what happened at all. Dennis tried to steal my mower while I was actively using it to mow my lawn. I didn't threaten anyone. I just told him he wasn't taking my property." Sharon sighed, and for a moment she looked genuinely tired. "Can I come in? This is going to take a few minutes to sort out." I let her in and we sat in my living room. She pulled out a tablet and showed me Dennis's complaint. According to his version of events, he'd been conducting a routine property inspection when he noticed my lawn was in severe violation. When he'd attempted to document the violation with photos, I'd allegedly become hostile and physically prevented him from performing his duties. "This is complete fiction," I said, handing back the tablet. "I have security cameras. I can show you exactly what happened." That seemed to catch her off guard. "You have cameras, 2 of them, one covering the front yard, one covering the back." "I installed them last year after someone kept letting their dog use my front lawn as a bathroom." "I'd like to see that footage, if you don't mind." I pulled up the video on my TV, showing the entire interaction from the backyard camera. The footage clearly showed Dennis entering my property through the side gate, walking past me without any attempt at conversation, and heading straight for my running mower. It showed me trying to stop him and our entire argument. There was no inspection, no photography, no hostility from me beyond refusing to let him take my mower. Sharon watched the whole thing in silence, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "I see," she said quietly when the video ended. "This is not what Dennis reported." "No, it's not." "Sharon, he literally tried to steal my mower. That's theft. I don't care if he's on the HOA board." "I understand your frustration. Let me talk to the other board members about this. Dennis has been somewhat overzealous lately, and this clearly crosses a line." "Somewhat overzealous." "He tried to confiscate my property." "What's next? Is he going to repo my car because he doesn't like the color?" Sharon stood up, looking uncomfortable. "I'll handle this, Connor. You won't receive any fines or violations for today. And I'll make sure Dennis understands the boundaries of his authority." After she left, I made a copy of the security footage and saved it in 3 different places. Something told me I was going to need it. The next morning, I was drinking coffee on my front porch when I noticed Dennis walking down the sidewalk with a clipboard, doing his usual morning inspection of the neighborhood. He was going house to house, making notes, taking photos, probably looking for any tiny infraction he could cite. When he reached my property, he stopped and stared at my lawn for a long moment, clearly trying to find something wrong with it. Finding nothing, he made a note on his clipboard and moved on without even glancing in my direction. I thought that would be the end of it. Sharon had seen the evidence. Dennis had been caught lying, and hopefully he'd back off. I should have known better. 2 days later, I got home from work to find a formal violation notice taped to my front door. According to the notice, my mailbox post was 3 inches taller than the approved specification and needed to be replaced within 14 days or I'd face daily fines of $50. The notice was signed by Dennis Whitmore, HOA compliance officer. I looked at my mailbox. It was the same mailbox that had been there when I bought the house. The same mailbox that had passed the initial HOA inspection 2 years ago. The same mailbox that was identical to every other mailbox in the neighborhood because the builder had installed them all at the same time. This was retaliation, plain and simple. I took photos of my mailbox, then walked down the street photographing every other mailbox in the development. They were all exactly the same height. Every single one. That evening, I went to Sharon's house with my evidence. She lived 3 streets over in one of the larger models, with a meticulously maintained front yard that probably took her hours each week to keep perfect. "Connor," she said when she opened the door, and I could hear the weariness in her voice. She already knew why I was there. "Every mailbox in this neighborhood is the same height," I said, handing her my phone with the photos. "Dennis is targeting me because I didn't let him steal my mower." Sharon looked through the photos, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I've already spoken to him about his conduct. Apparently, he didn't take it to heart. What are you going to do about this?" "I'll void the violation, and I'm going to call an emergency board meeting to discuss Dennis's position on the board." "Good, because if he keeps this up, I'm going to have to get a lawyer involved." Sharon nodded slowly. "I understand, and I'm sorry this has escalated like this. Dennis has been a board member for 6 years, and he's never been quite this aggressive before. Something's changed with him recently." I left feeling slightly better, but still frustrated. This whole situation was ridiculous. I had enough stress in my life without having to deal with a vindictive HOA board member who couldn't handle being called out for his behavior. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening. I wasn't technically supposed to attend since I wasn't on the board, but Sharon emailed me to say I should come to present my side of things. The meeting was held at the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that was mainly used for HOA meetings and the occasional birthday party rental. When I arrived, Sharon was already there along with the 3 other board members, Robert Chen, the treasurer, Patricia Hayes, the secretary, and Dennis, who sat with his arms crossed and a scowl on his face. "Thank you for coming, Connor," Sharon said. "We've reviewed the security footage you provided, and we've also looked into several other recent complaints about Dennis's conduct. We wanted to get your statement on the record before we proceed with our discussion." I recounted everything that had happened, from Dennis attempting to take my mower to the retaliatory violation notice. I also mentioned several other incidents over the past 2 years where Dennis had seemed to go out of his way to make my life difficult, including the time he'd issued me a violation for having my garage door open for more than the approved 2 hours while I was organizing my garage, even though there was no such rule in the actual HOA covenants. Dennis interrupted several times, trying to claim he was just doing his job and enforcing the rules, but Sharon shut him down each time. "Dennis, you'll have a chance to speak," she said firmly. "Let Connor finish." When I was done, Robert Chen asked to see the security footage again. We watched it on Sharon's laptop, and I could see Robert and Patricia exchanging concerned glances. "Dennis, what you did was attempt to steal a resident's personal property," Robert said. "There's no other way to interpret this. And then you filed a false report about the incident." "I was enforcing HOA regulations," Dennis insisted. "His lawn was in violation." "He was actively mowing it," Patricia said. "How is that a violation?" "The violation occurred before he started mowing." "That's not how any of this works," Sharon said. "You don't confiscate someone's property because their grass is too tall. You issue a notice, give them time to comply, and only then assess fines if they fail to correct the issue. And you certainly don't lie about what happened when questioned about it." The meeting went on for another hour. Dennis refused to admit he'd done anything wrong, insisting he was just being more diligent than the other board members. He claimed the HOA was becoming too lax, and that property values would suffer if violations weren't strictly enforced. Finally, Sharon called for a vote on whether to remove Dennis from the board. Robert and Patricia both voted yes immediately. Dennis, of course, voted no. Sharon hesitated for a long moment before voting yes as well. "Dennis, effective immediately, you're removed from the HOA board," Sharon announced. "You're no longer authorized to conduct inspections, issue violations, or represent the HOA in any official capacity." Dennis's face went bright red. "You can't do this. I've given 6 years to this board. And we appreciate your service, but your recent conduct has been inappropriate and potentially illegal. This is our final decision." Dennis stood up so fast his chair fell over backward. "This is because of him," he shouted, pointing at me. "He's been a problem since the day he moved in. His lawn is always too long, his trash cans are visible from the street, his car is parked in the driveway overnight instead of the garage." "Dennis, you need to leave," Sharon said calmly. "Fine. But this neighborhood is going to fall apart without proper enforcement. You'll see." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him so hard the windows rattled. There was a long silence after he left. "Well," Patricia finally said, "that went about as well as expected." Sharon turned to me. "Connor, I apologize on behalf of the board for everything you've dealt with. All violations Dennis issued against you are voided. If he contacts you directly or comes onto your property again, please call the police and let us know immediately." I thanked them and left, feeling relieved but also slightly uneasy. Dennis had seemed genuinely unhinged at the end there. I hoped that would be the last I'd see of him, but something told me it wouldn't be. I was right. 3 days after the board meeting, I came home from work to find my mower missing from my garage. I knew I'd left it there that morning because I'd mowed my front lawn before heading to the office. The side door to the garage was slightly ajar, which was strange because I always kept it locked. I checked the lock and found scratches around the mechanism, like someone had forced it open. My stomach dropped. This couldn't be a coincidence. I immediately called the police and filed a report. The officer who responded was a young guy named Martinez who took photos of the damaged lock and the empty space where the mower had been. "Any idea who might have taken it?" he asked. "I have a pretty good idea, yeah." I told him about Dennis and everything that had happened over the past week. Officer Martinez frowned as he took notes. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have any proof he took it?" "Not yet, but my security cameras might have caught something." We went inside and I pulled up the footage. Sure enough, around 11 that morning, Dennis appeared on camera. He looked around nervously, then approached the side door of my garage with what looked like a crowbar. It took him about 5 minutes to force the lock, and then he disappeared inside. A few minutes later, he emerged pushing my mower down the driveway and out of frame. "Well, that's pretty clear-cut," Officer Martinez said. That's breaking and entering plus theft. I'll need a copy of that footage. I provided him with the video along with Dennis's full name and address. Martinez said he'd follow up with Dennis and get back to me. I called Sharon next to let her know what had happened. She sounded horrified. I was afraid something like this might happen, she said. He was so angry when he left the meeting. I'm so sorry, Connor. Not your fault. The police are handling it now. Keep me updated, please. And the HOA will cover any costs associated with this, including your damaged lock, and if you need to file an insurance claim. About 2 hours later, Officer Martinez called me back. Mr. Lawson, we went to Dennis Whitmore's address. He claims he doesn't know anything about your mower and refused to let us search his property without a warrant. However, one of his neighbors reported seeing him pushing a mower into his backyard around midday. We're working on getting a warrant now. How long will that take? Usually a few hours, maybe tomorrow morning at the latest. In the meantime, I'd recommend staying alert and maybe staying with a friend tonight if you're concerned about further retaliation. I assured him I'd be fine. I had good locks on my doors and I'd be watching the security cameras closely. Still, I have to admit I didn't sleep great that night. Every noise outside had me checking the camera feeds on my phone. The next morning, Officer Martinez called with an update. We executed the search warrant about an hour ago. We found your mower in Mr. Whitmore's backyard. But there's a complication. What kind of complication? The mower is badly damaged. The blade housing is cracked, the engine block has a large dent, and there appears to be significant internal damage. Mr. Whitmore claims he found the mower abandoned near the neighborhood entrance and was planning to turn it into lost and found. He says the damage was already there when he found it. That's complete garbage. The mower was in perfect condition yesterday morning. I believe you, but proving he caused the damage is going to be tricky. Can you come down to the station to formally identify the mower and assess the damage? I took a long lunch break from work and went to the police station. They had my mower in an evidence area behind the building. One look at it made me feel sick. The thing was destroyed. The entire right side of the blade housing was crushed inward, like it had hit something incredibly hard at full speed. There was a massive dent in the engine casing, and when I tried to start it, nothing happened. The engine was completely dead. This mower was less than a year old, I told Officer Martinez. I paid $800 for it. It was working perfectly yesterday morning. Do you have proof of purchase? Yeah, I have the receipt at home. And the security footage from yesterday morning shows me using it to mow my front lawn before work. Martinez made notes. That's good. We'll need all of that for the case. Mr. Whitmore is being charged with breaking and entering, theft, and destruction of property. He'll be arraigned tomorrow morning. Over the next few days, I pieced together what had actually happened through a combination of police reports and neighborhood gossip. Apparently, after Dennis stole my mower, he decided to use it on his own lawn. His property backed up to the desert area behind the development, and his landscaping included a lot of decorative rock features. While mowing near one of these rock gardens, he'd run over a large decorative boulder that was partially hidden by grass. The mower blade had caught the rock at full speed, causing catastrophic damage to the entire machine. Instead of admitting what he'd done and taking responsibility, Dennis had apparently panicked. He tried to hide the damaged mower in his storage shed, but his neighbors had already seen him pushing it around, which is how the police were able to get the warrant so quickly. The whole thing would have been funny if it wasn't so expensive and frustrating. My mower was totaled. The repair estimate came back at $600, which was more than it made sense to spend on a machine that cost $800 new. I needed a new mower, and I needed Dennis to pay for it. I filed a claim in small claims court for the cost of a replacement mower, plus the damaged lock on my garage, plus the filing fees. The court date was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, Dennis was arraigned on the criminal charges. He pleaded not guilty and was released on his own recognizance. The trial was scheduled for 2 months out. His lawyer tried to argue that this was all a misunderstanding, that Dennis had genuinely believed he was recovering abandoned property, but the security footage made that defense pretty much impossible. The neighborhood was buzzing with gossip about the whole situation. Most people were supportive of me, having dealt with Dennis's overzealous enforcement themselves over the years. A few people, though, seemed to think I was making a big deal out of nothing and that Dennis had just made a mistake. Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor, brought me cookies one evening and apologized for not intervening when she'd witnessed the initial confrontation. "I should have said something when I saw him trying to take your mower," she said. "I just didn't want to get involved with HOA drama." "It's okay," I assured her. "I don't think anything you said would have stopped him anyway. He's always been so intense about the rules. I got fined $200 last year because my rose bush was 6 inches over the property line. 6 inches. I had to dig up the whole bush and move it." Stories like that kept coming. It turned out Dennis had been terrorizing the neighborhood for years, and people had just accepted it as the price of living in an HOA community. Now that he'd finally crossed a legal line, it was like the floodgates had opened, and everyone wanted to share their Dennis horror stories. The HOA board sent out an email to all residents explaining that Dennis was no longer affiliated with the board, and that any previous violations he'd issued were under review. They also announced they were revising the enforcement procedures to prevent this kind of abuse in the future. My small claims court date arrived on a Thursday morning. I took the day off work and showed up with a folder full of evidence: receipts for the mower, photos of the damage, security camera footage, police reports, repair estimates, and photos of the damaged garage lock. Dennis showed up with a lawyer, which surprised me for a small claims case. The lawyer was a middle-aged woman named Victoria Ross who looked expensive. I wondered how much Dennis was paying her to defend an $800 claim. The hearing was in front of a judge named Harold Brennan, who looked like he'd been doing this for about 100 years. He had a no-nonsense attitude that I immediately appreciated. "Mr. Lawson, present your case," he said after we were all seated. I laid out everything that had happened, starting with Dennis attempting to confiscate my mower the first time, his removal from the HOA board, and then the theft and destruction of my property. I presented all my evidence, including the security footage showing both the initial altercation and the actual theft. Judge Brennan watched the footage with an increasingly skeptical expression. When it got to the part where Dennis broke into my garage, he shook his head slightly. "Mr. Whitmore, is this you in the video?" he asked. Dennis's lawyer answered before he could. "Your Honor, that's a matter for the criminal court to decide. We're here today only to address the civil claim. I'm aware of what we're here for, Counselor. I'm asking your client if that's him in the video breaking into Mr. Lawson's garage." Dennis shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, I found that mower abandoned near the neighborhood entrance. I was storing it temporarily to turn into the HOA lost and found. Through a locked garage door that you broke open, I may have been mistaken about where I found the mower." Judge Brennan looked at him for a long moment. Miss Ross, do you have any evidence to present?" Victoria Ross stood up. "Your Honor, my client maintains that this is all a misunderstanding. He believed he was acting within his authority as an HOA board member to address code violations. By stealing personal property and breaking into someone's garage, he was attempting to enforce community standards. Miss Ross, I've been a judge for 23 years and I've seen a lot of HOA disputes. This isn't enforcement. This is theft and vandalism. He turned back to me. Mr. Lawson, you're seeking $800 for a replacement mower and $50 for the lock repair. Yes, Your Honor. Plus the filing fees of $75, he made a note. And Mr. Whitmore, you destroyed this mower. How exactly? Dennis's face reddened. It was an accident. I hit a rock. While using a mower you'd stolen from Mr. Lawson's garage. I didn't steal it. I was Mr. Whitmore. I'm going to stop you there before you perjure yourself in my courtroom. The video evidence is very clear. You broke into Mr. Lawson's garage and took his mower. You then damaged it and tried to hide it. The fact that you damaged it while using it actually makes this worse, not better. Victoria Ross tried to interject. Your Honor, I've heard enough. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $925, covering the replacement mower, lock repair, and filing fees. Additionally, I'm awarding Mr. Lawson $300 in punitive damages because this is one of the more egregious cases I've seen. Mr. Whitmore, you have 30 days to pay. Dennis looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. This is ridiculous. The HOA board had no right to remove me, and now I'm being persecuted for doing my job. Your job doesn't include breaking and entering, sir. And I suggest you pay very close attention to the outcome of your criminal trial. If you're convicted, Mr. Lawson will have grounds for additional civil action. Judge Brennan banged his gavel. We're done here. Outside the courtroom, Dennis and his lawyer had a heated conversation in hushed tones. I caught fragments of it as I walked past. I told you we should have settled, Victoria Ross was saying. Now you're out $1,200 plus my fees. This isn't over, Dennis muttered. I decided not to engage and headed to my car. I'd won, which was satisfying, but I still didn't have a working mower, and I was still dealing with the stress of all this. Plus, Dennis's criminal trial was still pending. That trial ended up being pushed back twice for various procedural reasons. In the meantime, I bought a new mower using money from my savings, figuring I'd pay myself back once Dennis actually paid the judgment. I wasn't holding my breath on that happening quickly. Life started to return to normal. The new HOA board was much more reasonable. They conducted inspections quarterly instead of daily, and they actually gave people reasonable time to fix legitimate violations. Trash cans visible from the street. You got a friendly reminder email, not a fine. Grass a little too tall. A polite notice with a 2-week correction period. It was how an HOA should function, maintaining property values and neighborhood standards without being tyrannical about it. I didn't see Dennis around the neighborhood much anymore. Someone told me he was mostly staying inside, probably on advice from his lawyer given the pending criminal case. The criminal trial finally happened 4 months after the initial theft. I had to testify, which meant taking another day off work. The courthouse was downtown Phoenix, a massive modern building that always made me feel small. The prosecutor was a sharp woman named Jennifer Nelson, who'd clearly dealt with plenty of cases like this. She walked me through everything that had happened, playing the security footage for the jury and having me identify Dennis as the person breaking into my garage. Dennis's defense attorney, a different lawyer this time, tried to argue that Dennis had been under significant stress due to his removal from the HOA board and wasn't thinking clearly. They painted him as a dedicated community volunteer who just snapped under pressure. The jury didn't buy it. After deliberating for less than 3 hours, they came back with guilty verdicts on all counts: breaking and entering, theft, and destruction of property. The sentencing hearing was 2 weeks later. Dennis got 1 year of probation, 200 hours of community service, and he was ordered to pay restitution. Between the restitution and the small claims judgment, he owed me just over $2,000 when you included all the court costs and fees. Judge Sandra Kowalski, who presided over the criminal case, was particularly harsh in her remarks during sentencing. "Mr. Whitmore, you held a position of trust in your community, and you abused that trust in the worst possible way," she said. "You engaged in what amounts to a petty act of revenge that escalated into multiple crimes. You could have simply accepted that you'd been removed from the board and moved on with your life. Instead, you chose to break the law. I hope you use this probation period to reflect on your choices." Dennis stood there looking deflated, nothing like the aggressive, self-righteous person who tried to take my mower that day 6 months ago. After the sentencing, I ran into Dennis in the courthouse hallway. He was alone, his lawyer having already left. "I hope you're happy," he said bitterly. "You destroyed my reputation." I stopped walking and turned to face him. "Dennis, I didn't destroy anything. You did this to yourself. All I wanted was to mow my lawn in peace. You're the one who decided to steal my property." I was trying to maintain community standards. "That's what board members are supposed to do." "No, board members are supposed to enforce reasonable rules in a reasonable way. What you did was harassment, theft, and vandalism. There's a difference." He opened his mouth like he wanted to argue more, but then seemed to deflate. "I gave 6 years to that board. I cared about that neighborhood." "I know you did. But you cared about it the wrong way. You made people afraid of their own HOA. That's not good for the community." Dennis looked away. "The lawyer bills alone are over $15,000. My wife is furious. We might have to sell the house." I felt a momentary flash of sympathy, but then I remembered him breaking into my garage and destroying my property. "That's unfortunate, but those are consequences of your choices. I didn't make you steal my mower." "I know," he said quietly. It was the first time I'd heard him actually admit fault. "I know I screwed up. I got so angry when the board removed me. I felt betrayed. And when I saw your mower in the garage that day, I wasn't thinking straight." That's what you should have told the court, instead of making up stories about finding abandoned property. "My lawyer told me to deny everything. You need a better lawyer." He almost laughed at that. Almost. Yeah, I do." We stood there for a moment in awkward silence. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry," Dennis finally said. "I'm sorry I took your mower. I'm sorry I damaged it. I'm sorry for all the hassle I caused you over the years. It wasn't much, but it was something. Thanks for saying that. I hope you figure things out, Dennis. I really do." He nodded and walked away, looking like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Getting the money from Dennis proved to be another challenge entirely. The restitution was handled through the court system, which automatically garnished his wages, so that part was straightforward. But the small claims judgment was another matter. Dennis claimed he didn't have the money to pay it all at once and requested a payment plan. I agreed to $50 a month, figuring something was better than nothing. It would take 2 years to pay off, but at least I'd eventually get my money back. The first payment arrived on time. So did the second and third. By the 4th month, I'd almost forgotten to check for them. They just showed up automatically, deposited into my account like clockwork. I ran into Sharon one day at the grocery store. We chatted for a few minutes about how the neighborhood was doing. "Things have been so much better since we restructured the board," she said. "We actually had a board meeting last month where nobody yelled or threatened to sue anyone. It was amazing." "That does sound amazing. We also updated the covenants to clarify enforcement procedures and limit board member authority. Everything has to be documented and approved by majority vote now. No more unilateral decisions. That's how it should have been from the start. I know. I think we all just got complacent over the years. Dennis was so active and seemed so dedicated that we let him have too much autonomy. We didn't realize he was becoming a problem until it was too late. Well, at least you fixed it. We're trying. The neighborhood seems happier overall. We've had fewer complaints in the last 6 months than we usually get in a month. I was genuinely happy to hear that. The whole situation with Dennis had been exhausting and expensive, but at least something good had come from it. The HOA had reformed its practices, and the neighborhood was better for it. About 8 months after the trial, I got a check in the mail for the full remaining balance of the small claims judgment. There was a note with it in Dennis's handwriting. My wife and I are selling the house and moving to Tucson to be closer to her family. I wanted to settle all outstanding debts before we left. Again, I'm sorry for everything. Best wishes, Dennis Whitmore. I stood in my kitchen holding the check, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Relief that I'd finally been paid in full. Sadness that things had gone so far that Dennis felt he had to leave the neighborhood entirely. And maybe a small amount of vindication that justice had been served. I deposited the check and used the money to buy some new landscaping for my front yard. Nothing extravagant, just some nice drought-resistant plants that would look good and require minimal maintenance. I made sure everything I planted was in full compliance with HOA regulations, of course. Old habits die hard. The new HOA board approved my landscaping plan without issue. In fact, Patricia Hayes, who'd become the new vice president, came by while I was planting and complimented my choice of native plants. "This is going to look great," she said. "And it's exactly the kind of thing we want to encourage. Good for the environment and good for the neighborhood." Thanks. I figured after everything that happened I should probably stay on the HOA's good side. She laughed. "Connor, you were never on the HOA's bad side. You were on Dennis's bad side. There's a difference." Fair point. "We actually used your situation as a case study when we were revising the covenants. What happened to you should never happen to anyone in this neighborhood again." That made me feel better. At least my nightmare experience had led to positive changes. Life moved on. My new mower worked great. My lawn stayed at an appropriate height without anyone threatening to confiscate my equipment. I even joined a couple of neighborhood committees, figuring if I was going to live in an HOA community, I might as well have some input into how it was run. About a year after Dennis moved away, I was elected to the HOA board myself. It wasn't something I'd planned on, but when Sharon decided to step down as president after serving for nearly a decade, several neighbors approached me about running for the open position. They felt I understood what it was like to be on the receiving end of overzealous enforcement and would bring a balanced perspective to the board. I ended up running for treasurer instead, figuring I'd start with a less intense position. I won easily. The role mainly involved managing the HOA's finances and making sure we had enough money in reserves for common area maintenance and emergency repairs. It was straightforward work that actually interested me. During my first board meeting as treasurer, we discussed a proposal to increase the landscaping budget for the common areas. As we reviewed the numbers and debated the pros and cons, I thought about how different this was from what I'd experienced with Dennis. Everyone was respectful. Everyone listened to different viewpoints. When we voted, the decision was made democratically, and everyone accepted the outcome without drama. This was how it was supposed to work. People coming together to manage shared resources and maintain their community without turning into petty tyrants. After the meeting, Robert Chen, who was now serving as president, pulled me aside. "You're doing a great job with the finances," he said. "Thanks for stepping up. Happy to help. You know, when you first moved in and started having all those issues with Dennis, I felt bad that we didn't intervene sooner. We all knew he was over the line, but nobody wanted to confront him about it. It worked out eventually. It did, but you shouldn't have had to go through all that. You shouldn't have had to get the police involved and go to court just to protect your property from your own HOA board member. No, I shouldn't have. But it made the neighborhood better in the long run, so I guess there's a silver lining." Robert nodded. "There is. We're a better HOA now because we learned from that disaster. Over the next 2 years, I served as treasurer and watched the neighborhood continue to improve. Property values went up. More young families moved in. We had neighborhood barbecues and holiday parties that people actually wanted to attend. The HOA became what it should have always been, a tool for maintaining the community, not a weapon for control. I heard through the grapevine that Dennis was doing okay in Tucson. Someone who knew his wife said he'd gotten a job in retail management and was staying far away from any HOA involvement. I hoped that was true. I hoped he'd learned from his mistakes and found a better way to channel whatever had driven him to be so controlling. As for me, I kept mowing my lawn every Saturday morning, keeping the grass at a perfect 3 inches. Not because I was afraid of violations or fines, but because I took pride in my property and wanted the neighborhood to look good. My garage side door had a new, much stronger lock. My security cameras were upgraded and now covered every angle of my property. I'd learned the hard way that documentation was everything when dealing with disputes, but mostly, I'd learned that standing up for yourself, even against someone in a position of authority, was worth the hassle. Dennis had counted on me being intimidated by his board member status. He'd assumed I'd just accept his increasingly aggressive enforcement tactics, because challenging the HOA seemed too difficult. He'd been wrong. Sometimes I'd be out working in my yard, and I'd think about that day when Dennis tried to take my mower. How angry and violated I'd felt watching him attempt to steal my property in broad daylight. How frustrated I'd been dealing with his retaliation afterward. And then I'd think about the sound his face must have made when that mower hit the rock in his yard, destroying the very thing he'd stolen. There was probably a metaphor there about karma or consequences, or pride going before a fall. Whatever it was, it made me smile every time I cranked up my replacement mower and got to work on my lawn. The neighborhood was peaceful now. The HOA functioned properly. People respected each other's property and privacy. It had taken a criminal trial and thousands of dollars in legal fees to get here, but we'd arrived at a better place. And my lawn was absolutely perfect. Exactly 3 inches tall, lush and green, maintained with care every single week. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. That made all the difference. One quiet Sunday afternoon, about 3 years after the whole incident, I was sitting on my back patio with a cold drink, admiring my handiwork after finishing the week's mowing. Mrs. Patterson waved from her yard next door. "Lawn looks great, Connor." She called over. "Thanks. Yours too. Remember when Dennis tried to tell me my grass was growing at an unapproved angle," she said, laughing. "An angle, like grass has some predetermined direction it's supposed to grow," I laughed too. "I forgot about that one. We all have our Dennis stories. Yours is just the most dramatic. Lucky me. You know what, though? I'm glad it happened. I know that sounds terrible, but if you hadn't stood up to him, he'd probably still be on the board making all our lives miserable." She was right. Sometimes it took one person refusing to accept unacceptable behavior to create change. Sometimes you had to be willing to fight back, even when it was exhausting and expensive and seemingly not worth the effort. As the sun set over Phoenix, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I thought about how much had changed since that afternoon when I'd caught Dennis trying to steal my mower. The neighborhood was better. The HOA was better. And I was better for having learned that I could stand up for myself and win. My new mower sat in my garage safely behind a locked door, ready for next weekend's work. It was just a machine, a tool for cutting grass, but it represented something more now. It represented the principle that nobody, not even someone with a title and perceived authority, had the right to take what wasn't theirs. Dennis learned that lesson the hard way when his stolen mower hit that rock in his yard and broke down. The mower couldn't survive the impact of his poor choices, just like his position on the board and his reputation couldn't survive the impact of his actions. I finished my drink and headed inside, satisfied with my work and with the knowledge that sometimes justice prevails. It might take time, it might take effort, and it might require you to stand alone against someone who seems powerful. But in the end, the truth wins out, and my grass stayed at exactly 3 inches, perfectly maintained, a quiet testament to the fact that you can follow the rules without letting the rules control your life. The HOA board that Dennis had once dominated with his aggressive tactics was now a model of reasonable governance. We just completed a neighborhood survey, and satisfaction rates were at an all-time high. 92% of residents reported being happy with how the HOA was managed. That number meant something. It meant people felt safe in their homes. It meant they weren't afraid of arbitrary fines or harassment. It meant the HOA was serving its intended purpose, instead of serving the ego of one overzealous individual. I kept the security camera footage of Dennis stealing my mower saved in multiple locations. Not because I ever plan to use it again, but as a reminder of what can happen when power goes unchecked, a reminder that standing up for yourself is worth the effort, and a reminder that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting someone face the natural consequences of their own actions. That rock in Dennis's yard had done more to end his reign of HOA terror than any complaint or board meeting ever could. Sometimes karma doesn't need any help. As I locked up for the night, I glanced at my new mower one more time. It was a good machine, reliable and well built. But more importantly, it was mine, and nobody was going to take it from me ever again. The neighborhood lights came on automatically as darkness fell, illuminating the pristine lawns and well-maintained homes of Sunshine Vista Estates. It was a good place to live now. A place where people felt respected and where the HOA worked for the residents instead of against them. And somewhere in Tucson, Dennis Whitmore was hopefully living his life with a better understanding of boundaries, respect, and the consequences of crossing lines that should never be crossed. As for me, I'd sleep well that night knowing my property was secure, my neighborhood was thriving, and my lawn was absolutely, perfectly 3 inches tall.